Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Deb Bell, and I appreciate you being here today for a webinar on understanding your teen's brain. I hope I have valuable information for you, and that I also have time to perhaps have a good conversation, answer your questions. We have a poll for folks as they're coming into the room. Joining me today is Vicki Dincher, who is the registrar for AIM Academy. There's Vicki. She's going to be running the chat and also helping with the Q&A afterwards, because my aging brain is not really great at multitasking. So I had the wherewithal to think about how I could facilitate getting through this information. All right, so let's get underway. I hope that the first part of, I've got about 13 slides, and I think I can get through this by the bottom of the hour. And so as you think, go ahead. I don't care if you want to chat and make comments. And if you want to ask questions for the Q&A, go ahead and use the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen in order to post a question. And you can see the questions that are being asked. You can upvote those questions. You can comment on those. All right. And Vicki, let's see, I guess we'll, at the bottom of the hour is when I'll get the results from that poll. All right, that's what I think I want to do. So let's get underway. So we're talking about understanding your teen's brain. And in particular, I'm going to be talking today about early adolescence, the first 3 years of your child moving from childhood, and his body or her body and her brain start to undergo the dramatic transformation that is going to result in your child ultimately being an adult. And the changes cognitively, psychologically, and physically that are going to occur in your teenager are as dramatic as the changes that occur from birth to 3 years of age. So just think about everything that has changed and been transformed in your infant, in your baby, till the time that that baby becomes 3 years of age, right? She can now talk, she can now walk, she can now probably dress herself with minimal help, she can feed herself, she's potty trained, she's starting to play and explore and have friends, and understand jokes and have particular interests. You know, it's just remarkable. And think about how you shepherd and support your child through those 3 years, the kind of attention that you're giving to your child through those 3 years. And I think that this is a very similar time in our parenting. And so keep that analogy in mind. And the most important thing I want you to know today about your teen's brain is that when your teen is going through puberty and this huge cognitive growth spurt, which you can't really see, you can see the physical changes on the outside, know that that's correlating with the same kind of dramatic growth spurt cognitively on the inside. It is an enormous opportunity for learning, and it is a one-time opportunity for learning. There are things that are going to happen, there's opportunities, and there's some differences in your child's brain during early adolescence that are going to come to an end. And so we want to be aware of these things and be on top of things. So forewarned is forearmed. And that's my goal for you today. I would like to make sure that you have this valuable information so you know what to expect and you can be proactive rather than reactive. So adolescence is a powerful and positive opportunity. I really want to recast our thinking or our paradigm about adolescence as a once in a lifetime opportunity in the life of your child that you get the privilege of parenting her or him through. And it's not just that there's this opportunity in adolescence, what's also valuable is the process. And I think we as parents can be very intimidated about the process and what that looks like, or what we've heard that's like. I know I didn't have this information when I was taking my 4 adult children through the teenage years. And in reflecting and getting ready for the seminar, I realized, oh gosh, I made so many mistakes. Thankfully, we were able to adapt and work through them, but there was a lot of reactivity on my part, not being proactive. Learning during this season is overwhelmingly environmental and social. I want to make sure that I get this information also to our AIM Academy faculty, because we tend to think, oh, during the high school years and in the middle school years, we're going to be doing a lot more book learning, and we think about the academics. Well, really, what the brain is using to stimulate cognitive development are more environmental, which would be your home experiences that your child is having, and social relationships. So what your child's brain is using to learn, how do I become adult? How do I get new information? How do I develop new skills? How can I sort of learn, what are the rules of the road for adulthood? That information, or those opportunities for growth and development, are coming from the context that the child is in, and also the relationships that that child is in. So we as parents want to be positive and optimistic. And some of us are not wired this way, but I want to underscore it's important for us to set the tone in our home and in our relationship. We're the adults, so they're really kind of looking at us for the cues as to how is this going to go, my teenage years, or my trajectory, or my transition from childhood into adulthood and leaving the nest. We want to be positive and optimistic. We want to communicate faith in their future, no matter what's going on with your teen. And there's going to be, if you haven't hit it already, there's going to be moments of tension and worry, and it is going to be a little scary. Remember when you brought your first infant home from the hospital? Didn't it just boggle your mind? They were letting you take this little baby home and just giving this child over into your care, and it was frightening, right? But you figured it out. It's the same thing here. We want to be communicating faith in our children's future and the outcome. Like, ultimately, sweetie, this is going to work out. I know that you're having a rough time now. I know that you've had some fails. I know you've had some negative experiences. I know, sometimes our relationship is strained. You don't trust what mom or dad is recommending, but I just want you to know this is all part of what's normal. This is what happens. It's been happening for centuries. It's going to keep happening for centuries. It's going to be okay in the end, even if you're not feeling that way on the inside. You want to create a climate in your home and in your relationship of warmth, laughter, and affection. I wish I could go back and be more affectionate with my kids, because I now understand from my training how important touch is and how important expressions of love and affirmation. And so I think it really is a great way to set the conditions and the context for parenting and homeschooling through our child's greatest cognitive growth spurt they're going to have in their lifetime. So there's different kinds of parenting styles, and the one that the research has shown predicts the best outcomes in children in terms of they turn out to be stable, are successful at creating permanent relationships like marriage, job satisfaction, self-worth, self-esteem. When they track back, they find that those parents inevitably had an authoritative parenting style. The authoritative parent sets boundaries and provides structure, routine, regulations, just a framework. The parent is confident in his or her role in the child's life, that they are the parents. and they have warmth, even when they're disciplining or setting or delivering bad news or setting boundaries and establishing restrictions. They're communicating with it with a lot of warmth and affection. Other kinds of parenting with not so good outcomes are the authoritarian parenting, where there's a lot of control, a lot of restrictions, and a very cold or cool emotional climate in the home, or a laissez-faire parenting where they might really focus on warmth and acceptance, but they don't provide a lot of boundaries or structure or restraint. They try to be the kid's friend when really the child needs a parent. So those are sort of my big ideas before we get started. So here's a very condensed version of what happens cognitively over the course of 3 to 10 years. So early adolescence can start as young as age 8, and it can go to the, especially in males, to age 25 or beyond. So not all kids are going to have such a long adolescence, and we were talking about the point at which the brain is fully developed and they're now adults. They're in their adult body, and there's no more developmental growth that's predicted. For most kids, it's going to be a 3 to 5 year trajectory for girls, and maybe 5 to 8 years for boys. So what's happening is the amygdala is beginning to rapidly develop, and it is responsible for emotions. It doesn't control emotions, it triggers emotions, it fuels emotions. And because it is developing rapidly, there are big bursts of emotion. So kids can be reactive. They're experiencing a lot of feelings that they haven't felt before. And when they're happy, they're extraordinarily happy. And when they're sad, they're exquisitely sad. They're overwhelmingly sad. And the really important part of your child's brain, the part that separates us from the animals, is this prefrontal cortex, which human beings have. And this is command central. This is responsible for thinking and reasoning and logic. It's not fully developed, and it's the last to mature. So there you have two frontal lobes, and they are closing up. They are growing to the point where they're gonna touch, and that's not until the mid-20s that this capacity for thinking and reasoning and being logical, and also regulating emotions and having self-control. That, it's sort of, I like to think of the prefrontal cortex is like the cockpit of an airplane, and we're learning to pilot our self, our brain, our emotions, our reaction. We're learning to manage our behavior. And you go into this cockpit, and when you are a very experienced pilot, you know all of the dials to turn, you know all of the levers that need to be adjusted, you know how to do it very smoothly, how to take off and land, as if you are just gliding on glass. But that's not going to happen till your children are in their mid to late 20s. So I hope that helps you understand that they're going to be very irregular in regulating their emotions and managing their self-control, because they've got this amygdala that is like coursing through their bodies with sensations and feelings that they haven't really had before, as they're beginning to have adult reactions in their social relationships primarily. So what's happening in the prefrontal cortex is very unstable. Your kids can have good days and bad days. So it's just like growth spurts that they're having when they are younger. It's very uneven, and it can be unpredictable. Teens are very vulnerable during this stage. So they're very impressionable. And I'm going to be getting to the point where we're really talking about the environment, because that's the big takeaway today, is controlling their environment and providing sort of the training wheels and the guardrails that are necessary while they're practicing being an adult and while they're practicing learning how to manage and control their emotions and understand themselves and make decisions, all of that. So we want to be very aware of and engaged with them and the experiences they're having, especially during early adolescence, which are the middle school years for most kids. But I know with my own kids, they started early adolescence much younger than I expected, which is a phenomenon in the West. And so I felt like I was playing catch up all the time. By the time I figured out what was going on, it had been going on for 6 to 12 months, and I had not been reacting in a very constructive way. Early adolescence is more dramatic than late adolescence. So don't be freaked out by how disruptive and unpredictable kids are in the early years and think, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to make it to the end of high school with this child? It's like them learning how to walk, right? And it's going to be very erratic. And then as they start to develop skills, they're going to be acquiring skills, and you're going to be able to help them. I'm going to give you tips here today. You're going to be able to help them to acquire the skills and self-control and self-management techniques. It's not like you're helpless and that there aren't things. Like I said, the environment is the best source of biggest influence on learning. We're going to help them learn how to be adults. And so things are going to smooth out over time. I really, really enjoyed like 10th through 12th grade with my kids. It was lovely. The middle school years were a little disruptive. That was the toughest part. And the important thing I want to point out about the amygdala is it is actually the source of motivation. So motivation is really important to learning. And unfortunately, motivation is not generated or produced in the prefrontal cortex. It's not the result of logic and reasoning. Motivation is triggered by or supported by our emotions. So think about when you're most motivated and you get the most done and you have energy. It's usually when you're feeling good about yourself and you're happy. If you're experiencing anger and sadness, it also dissipates your energy and your achievement. So we need to take what's happening with our kids emotionally seriously because it's a huge influence. So what are the signs of early adolescence that things are underway? Of course, you're going to have growth spurt going on, right? Well, kids sleep and eat a lot more. They're hungry. And they sleep 10 hours. I mean, they sleep as much as a 2-year-old does. So they're not probably taking naps anymore. So that's why they're staying up. They become nocturnal. They stay up late and then they want to sleep in. I think it's one of the beauties of homeschooling to just lean into that, accept it, and work with it. They want to take risks. So because they're having these emotional bursts of feelings, they really like that. They those good positive feelings, they want to trigger those. So they are attracted to risks and thrills, and they seek novelty. They're always looking for something new, just like your toddlers, right? You wanted your babies to start to crawl, and then you would put things just outside of their reach because we understood we were going to teach this child how to walk. And then we were the great goalposts that we were working towards was they were going to be potty trained. And so we just kept giving them more and more novelty and new things in their environment because we understood like, okay, we need this baby to learn to walk and learn to be able to take care of himself. So ultimately, I'm not going to have to change diapers anymore. It's the same sort of thing is happening here again with our early adolescents there, and they're very motivated by rewards. I'm not going to have time to delve deeply into how to use that motivation to be rewarded positively or negatively. I'm going to reference a good book at the end that I think has a lot of good ideas, but they definitely want immediate reward. So it's why they play sports. It's why they get into competition. It's why they want to sign up for different kinds of activities where there's going to be some kind of trophy at the end of it or some kind of public recognition. They're very motivated by this immediate reward. And I think if you can bring that into your homeschool program, and AIM Academy can bring it into our classes, we're really leaning into and working with what is naturally a part of how adolescence works. Like, rather than thinking these are things that we have to get them to not value or suppress, let's lean into it. They'll express their own thoughts and views on many topics. Some of you are saying, well, I've got a 5-year-old who already is doing that. Well, there'll be some kind of change, okay? Pushing for greater independence, questioning beliefs, questioning authority. This is very normal. It's part of them making their faith or your family values their own. They're going to push against your authority. You're going to want to have more control, and they're going to be ready for freedom. And so it's going to be a dance. Very, very interested in being with their peers. They'll become very preoccupied with their peers, and you're not going to change that, especially if you want to someday have grandchildren like Vicki and I do. You're going to have to realize that this is a natural part of growing up. So it's something that you're going to have to manage and negotiate. When there's a physical growth spurt, it is signaling a cognitive growth spurt is taking place. I want to mention here, I don't know if you've had used standardized tests at all with your children. It's required here in Pennsylvania where I am, but I gave standardized tests to homeschool kids for 30 years here. So I've looked at thousands of test scores, and an interesting phenomenon to me is that elementary test scores are not at all good predictors of high school SAT scores. Now we can debate, the value of standardized tests, but let's give, for the sake of my point here, just give me that standardized tests appear to measure some kind of academic achievement. But during the elementary years, you can have kids that are scoring off the charts who really flatten out during high school. And then more surprisingly, you can have kids who really are struggling in elementary, and then early adolescence happens. They have that cognitive growth spurt, and now they're outscoring their peers on those standardized tests. And I saw that time and time again with all 4 of my children and many kids that I tested. 8th grade, I saw a dramatic change or shift in the results on their achievement tests. And it was because they were having this cognitive growth spurt, and you really do not know what your child's intellectual capacity or potential is until after early adolescence, and you get that big jump in their brain power. So what are the advantages of adolescence? There's some great things that are happening during this time that are not going to be as available to you again. The main thing is it's the rapid acquisition of knowledge and skill. So teenagers can really learn how to do a few things or learn about a topic, and they can learn and develop their skills very rapidly. So this is a time to really lean into that potential, because it's going to be harder for you. Like if you both started learning a foreign language at the same time, say, hey, as a family, let's learn Spanish. There's so many Spanish-speaking families in our neighborhood. We'll be able to reach out to them. Your teen is going to surpass you. If you both put in the same amount of effort and you're motivated, your teen is just going to leave you in the dust because of how hungry, how ravenous their brains are for knowledge and skills. They are able to plan now, so you should let them plan about their future and make decisions. They're not going to be good at planning. They need to practice planning, but they have a capacity for planning and looking ahead and making decisions that they didn't have when they were children. They're going to start to have greater self-control. So even though the prefrontal cortex is not matured till mid-20s, you're going to start to see increasingly that they are able to deny themselves gratification, that they're able to start to control that risk-taking, that drive for novelty. Their memory capacity really increases. The hippocampus is developing further. And just think about how you really can't remember everything from your childhood, can you? it's very hard. You like to think about what's my earliest memory, and you realize that there's a lot of gaps in your childhood memory. But what about seventh and eighth grade? Can you think back? When do you start to have pretty persistent, detailed, sequential memories of your life experiences? It's in early adolescence. Your capacity to remember episodes and events and the details is now becoming much more permanent. So you're capable of more complex decision making. Your teen is going to become capable of thinking about himself, reflecting on, hey, my motivations, why did I do that? What do I like? What am I learning about myself? Your little 6 or 7-year-old can't really give you a lot of insight into what he's like or why he does things, right? But your teen will start to be able to have more accurate understanding of his psychological motivation. He'll reflect on what he thinks about himself. More importantly, he's very influenced and affected by what others think about him. He's going to become very aware of, oh, other people have opinions of me, and he's going to care about that. He'll be able to think about his future and begin to plan out his future and narrow down his choices. This is called psychological insight. It's really good. We want to leverage that. It is a great opportunity for learning and creativity. What are the risks during adolescence? So there are some sharks in the water that we need to be aware of because they're not adults. Our teens are no longer children, but they are not yet adults. They overvalue and predict positive outcomes, and they underestimate negatives and risks. So they're overly optimistic and idealistic, and they underestimate the risks, which is why we send young men and women to war. Because older people know my chances of coming back are slim, perhaps, or they overvalue the positives in a dating relationship or a friendship. Like you can see, like, hey, this is really not a healthy relationship. And your teen is like, wants to tell you all the great things about this person and minimizes or overlooks or doesn't account for the negatives. And they're risk takers. They are risk takers. And you know this with driving. So they're very impulsive. They're susceptible to being impulsive. They're susceptible to addiction in all kinds of areas at this season of their life. So we need to be aware of what our children are being exposed to and consuming. They're susceptible to criminality. Their self-image and actions are strongly influenced by others. So all the stuff above that, the criminality, the addiction, the impulsivity, all of that usually occurs when they're with their peers. Like they're most at risk when they're with their peers. Doesn't mean don't let them have peers, right? But they're not as likely to engage in impulsive behavior or criminality or try drugs, whatever, when they're alone. It's when they're with others who are in the same season of life. And it's also a season when mental health issues can appear. And I need to put that on your radar. In particular, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, they can appear. It can end up being something that is in their history genetically, and they're going to have to learn how to live with it and deal with it. If you don't have a family history, you still need to know that teens are pretty susceptible to mental health issues, and you want to educate yourself and be proactive so you will know the signs. And I'm speaking from experience here as somebody who, had a child with an eating disorder right before my eyes, and I didn't even see that it was happening, and she needed intervention and she needed help. To my mother pointing it out to me after not having seen her for a number of months that she'd lost so much weight. And it's something that she talks about now. It's one of my adult children, and she will talk about it now. And it's something she still has to manage. She's learned if she's dealing with a lot of anxiety or fear, the first thing that goes is she stops eating, and she's learning how to manage it. But she started developing strategies. She needed to start developing strategies once it became apparent that this was going to be one of the ways that stress affected her in life. Now, those are sort of the generalities of what's going on. Each one of your teens has individual differences, and so that is a huge influence on how your child progresses through adolescence. Some of the individual differences is each teen's developmental timeline. You can have early matures, late matures, even within your own family, like when this stuff starts happening in your child's brain, we can't see, doctors aren't measuring it. And so it is going to happen. It's going to happen at different times. And if your child's kind of late, that might affect how he feels about himself. If your child's early, it might mean that he ends up being a bit of a troublemaker or influencing her peers too much because she's getting a lot more dopamine rushes and wants to go out and engage in risky behavior and have the thrills. So you just need to be aware of where your child is and what the developmental timeline has tended to be for each child. Genetic factors, I mentioned mental health, but also intelligence, how capable your child's going to be in the area of academics or athletics, whatever, is going to affect what their adolescent experience is like, and then their life experiences and their environment. So your child has innate factors like their own development timeline and genetic factors, but then there's external factors that heavily influence adolescence. For example, stress and trauma can trigger adolescence because when we are threatened, when resources are scarce, the human species is hardwired to reproduce before we die. And so, so if you're in a very stressful or traumatic setting, and I do think like the pandemic I haven't seen much of an upside in it for teens. I feel like they've really been overlooked, and we have not accounted for the vulnerability and just how detrimental it can be to really be socially isolating them. All of those things, I'm sure that you've been homeschooling, you've been able to provide more positive opportunities for your teens during the pandemic. But I know just in my own homeschool community, it's been a real struggle to carry on. But all that's to say, if really good positive things are happening to your teen, she's growing up in a stable home. She has a stable, predictable environment. Food is not scarce. Resources aren't scarce. There's lots of laughter and warmth. That is going to help her go through adolescence with less trauma, less variability, less impulsivity. So this is something that we can control as parents. And then also each child's temperament. And temperament is something in psychology that we're able to measure, whereas personality can be kind of a squishy, vague category. And the most researched and robust definition of temperament are the big 5 personality traits, which maybe I'll do a webinar on just the big 5 sometime. But you need to know that each one of your kids is obviously different, and how they negotiate adolescence will be influenced by their temperament. So Ocean is a good word for remembering the big 5 personality traits. Just quickly, openness is openness to new experiences. So some of us love open new experience and we run towards it. Others of us really are threatened or insecure by new, and they want things to be stable. And so all this new stuff that's happening isn't exciting for your teen, it is threatening. Conscientiousness is the other one. The polar opposite of that is, impulsive and lackadaisical. And we're on a continuum. We're not either or. We're somewhere on a continuum of how conscientious we are. Extroversion, the polar opposite of that is introversion, how outgoing we are versus how much we're an introvert. Agreeableness is how much we try to get along with other people, how easy we are to get along versus how independent we are or confrontational we are, or inflexible we might be, which makes our social relationships and our social circles small and strained. Neuroticism is anxiety, how neurotic are we versus how calm and confident we can be. So I'm sure you have seen these traits in all of your children as well as yourself, and understanding sort of your temperament and the temperament of each of your young teen is going to help you understand how adolescence is affecting them. There are changes in reasoning and thinking. This is why the academics get much more rigorous and challenging in middle school and high school, as well they should. Okay, as well they should. This is important for healthy brain development and to get the maximum potential that you have during this rapid growth. And I have this as a handout for you that Vicky's going to give you the link to when I'm done here. So I'm not going to unpack each of these points. So how can you support cognitive development in your early teen, in your young teen? These are some of the things that you can bring into her world that are very helpful for positive cognitive development. Teens need challenge. They need things to be difficult but achievable. So I think this is the beauty of homeschooling. Another asset is you can calibrate your curriculum and your program to each child. So they need to be challenged, lean into their interests, go with their interests, support their interests, and cultivate new interests, help them get interested in different things by exposing them to new things, because interest drives learning. Give them responsibility. Kids grow up faster. It's why your oldest is usually more mature than your youngest, because he's helping you with the younger kids, right? Get them a good job, give them chores, get her involved in babysitting or childcare, whatever. Figure out how to give your child some responsibility. Kids need to break a sweat when they're learning. They should have, if their brain isn't really growing if they're not exerting effort. So it's sort of like exercise and becoming an elite athlete. It's the same thing with academics. How to promote cognitive development is you got to put effort into it. Equally important is rest. So the brain consolidates information, learning during the day while sleeping. So that's why they're sleeping so long, is because the brain's very active, consolidating and trimming, deciding what to remember, what not to remember, moving information back into long-term memory where it can be retrieved. And all of this is facilitated by a calm and consistent environment. The extent that you can keep your home and your homeschool program and your mood and your interactions with your teen calm, predictable, and consistent, right? That the greater cognitive power she or he has to give to learning. But if there are things in the environment that are stressful or stress-inducing, that's going to drain some of that cognitive energy. So, I mean, we all have good days and bad days. It just helps us, I think, as homeschool parents to realize how important our mood is and our reaction. So my last slide here before we open it up for questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A. Normalize what is happening. That's like just tell your child, yeah, don't be surprised. Like forewarned is forearmed for them as well. Let kids practice making decisions, calculating risk, and managing their affairs. create a safe environment where they get to practice, just like you allowed them to practice learning how to ride a bicycle by starting with a tricycle and then training wheels. They've got to practice being adults in a safe environment where if they fail, the cost of failure is not significant. I think one of the dangers in homeschooling is if because we're so in our kids' lives, is that we're overly managed and actually preventing them from experiencing failure or preventing them from figuring out how to negotiate difficult relationships on their own, with us maybe advising in the background. But we can be a little bit too involved when it might be time for us to, okay, let's see what you learn, go for it, and we can talk about it afterwards. If it doesn't work out, we'll figure something out. Okay, provide information on psychological and cognitive development so they know what's going on. Loop your teen in on what to expect in terms of how they're changing, what's going to happen next. Be relatable, talk about your own experience so that they don't feel like they're alone. Use books, movies, and other scenarios for simulating life experiences where they can work through in their mind and through conversation with you strategies and develop insights so that they know ahead of time. Like, okay, so when you're watching a book or you're reading a book together or you're watching a movie together, use that to kind of, you don't want your kids to just go out and experience. They don't have to have the actual experience, especially if it's a negative one, to be prepared for how to avoid those situations or how to navigate those situations. We've got lots of characters in books and movies or in other people's lives, right, where you can talk through, okay, what would you do if this happened? What do you think your options will be? I just know in talking with my kids when they were teens, that they just ended up in situations where they had no idea what the right thing was to do. And because you're impulsive and you haven't had experience, then they did something impulsive that, hardly anybody does what they would do the first time in a new situation. Enroll them in a good psych class, provide those boundaries that I talked about, but give them plenty of room for choice and voice. Listen to them, let your teens tell you what they're thinking. Even if what they're thinking you find deeply disturbing or scary, it doesn't serve us if we don't know what they're thinking, if they can't talk to us because of our reaction. Pick your battles and manage the environment, change circles, change churches, change friends, move, keep things simple, and do something new. Like if there's something in your environment and that's not very healthy or productive, if you can change it or mitigate it or reduce its influence, we need to be proactive. And here's the one book. I looked at a whole lot of books, and I think this one would be really helpful if you want to know more and want a deep dive into your teen's brain. It's available on Amazon, The Incredible Teenage Brain. Thank you. So let me turn to your questions. Vicki, do you want to come on?
I'm not sure the question and answer thing is working. I can't see any place to ask a question there. So if you have a question, put it in the chat box and I can get that to Deb. There's nothing in the Q&A at this point or the chat box.
Okay. All right, folks, we'll pretend that you put questions in there. Is there no questions in the Q&A because you folks can't see the Q&A? Like I said, I had a pretty strong registration, so I wanted to try using a webinar. Okay, people can, thanks, Sonia. Yeah, Bonnie.
Okay, they're there.
Here at AIM Academy, we're focused on teens' well-being, and so Bonnie Gonzalez offers an excellent psych class and also several mini courses on developing a growth mindset and helping kids with this information we're talking about, as well as Rebecca Robbins, She's new at AIM Academy, and she does study skills, helps kids with their study skills, and also dives into a lot of the psychology of developing self-control and time management and things like that.
The link, yeah, Susan, the link to the recording of the webinar. She wants to know where will they find the link to the recording of the webinar.
I will send the link out to the recording after it's posted to everybody who registered. So I put a download of on a PDF. So, all right. Hey, well, Vic, let me just draw you in since while we're waiting to see if people have any questions or things that we want to respond to. Can you just relate a little bit about your own experience raising 4 kids and homeschooling them?
Well, the comment that came to mind as you were speaking was I, had 3 teenagers, and at one point there were 4 all within that range at one time. And it was at the same time that I was approaching menopause. So it was a real wild time at my house because hormones were crazy. So the key thing that I think that impressed me as you were speaking was that, having that mindset that I can make sure that my home and my homeschool is calm and peaceful as much as I can make it was of utmost importance. And I think that looking back, that was something that did help us get through that kind of very high emotional time period with all of them. And I mean, it is hard because in order to give your kids those opportunities to practice with autonomy and all the different things, we had a lot of sports going on, and there were a lot of different things that the kids were involved in that we wanted to give them those opportunities to practice. And, so it takes a lot. You think when your kids are toddlers that this is as hard as it gets, but the teenage years are equally as hard, just in a whole different way. And I think if you just realize this is part of my job and I'm going to get through this, and my goal is to make them the most healthy adult that they can be, it helps you to get through those rather difficult days.
Yeah, I think I'd love to do something, and maybe Michelle Brownell, who is our parent advisor here at AIM Academy, and having a convo and conversation, coffee and convo on Monday night. Michelle's in the room, and we'll send out a reminder about this, but maybe pulling Michelle into this. I think we should have some self-care for homeschool moms. Because I also think that I was very naive about just the psychological drain that homeschooling is. Mm-hmm. So I think that if you start with yourself, if you as a homeschool mom are first starting out, like, okay, what can I adapt or modify in this environment that I can give my teenagers at least the best context? And then realizing, oh, I am just burned out. And so I do think, I will just share this with the women who are in the room here. Like, Vicki is one of my dearest friends, and we homeschooled together. And that co-op that we were a part of was a big part of us getting through homeschooling, because it was a really healthy co-op that had good leadership and provided opportunities for the moms to really grow their friendships. And I think I didn't realize at the time, when I look back on homeschooling, in fact, Dick, I was just with my kids and they were reflecting on this, the fact that we had you in our life and 3 or 4 other friends, right? Like, we had a circle, we were all in this homeschool community together, and our kids had really healthy, good friends to hang around with. But they also admired the relationship and the friendships that we had. And I do think it was, in hindsight, I didn't realize how critical that it was such a gift.
Yes, I agree. I think that made a huge difference. I know, for me as the mom, as well as looking back on how the kids benefited from that as well. There is a question. I have a question. Are you ready for one?
Sure, thanks.
What suggestions do you have for the students who have extreme negativity at home?
Yeah, I saw that. I feel for you, because it's sort of like having a toddler who throws temper tantrums or an infant who won't sleep the night. I mean, it is just exhausting. And I think, I think I do think that sometimes there's a place for a counselor. So I wanted to mention this. I would love to normalize having a counselor like Bonnie Gonzalez is a licensed family counselor, and using a professional counselor or somebody in your network who doesn't mind fulfilling this role. They don't have to necessarily be professional, but the nice thing about a professional counselor is you pay them to listen to you talk, and then it's not their turn. With your girlfriends, you have to help each other. So all that's to say is you might want to get some professional help before it gets really bad. If it is bad, I think you do have to figure out how you can still maintain that warmth and that affection. I mean, I think the hardest thing for us as moms when we have a difficult child is to keep putting ourselves out there emotionally for that kid. And so we tend to withdraw because the child's being so negative, and that isn't going to help make it better. It's going to strain it. We have to just sort of push in and be determined, like, no matter what, love is unconditional in this home. Did you have thoughts, Vic?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I know I'm looking at, my grandkids now, and one of my grandsons definitely has, he's got some anger issues, and you can see when all of them are together. I'm fortunate enough to have them all coming around a lot, and I can see the exhaustion on my daughter, who's like constantly having to be the calm, quiet, put herself in that place to bring him to a place where he can handle his own emotions. And it's really, you're right, it's really the same thing when you have a teenager who's in a very negative place. And I think any support that I can be to my daughter, I think is only helpful to her supporting my grandson when he's having a rough day or whatever. And so I think it's true, not only getting some counseling help for a negative child, but also for yourself to help give you perspective in how to be that support person for that, negative or difficult teen.
Yeah, I mean, I have some strategies for, reactive or negative kids or kids who aren't able to manage their emotions. I do think it's unique to the child. I would say in our home, like just walking away and leaving the child alone, letting him or her work things out. Michelle's making a recommendation of a good book. Michelle Brown, now I just want to say, if I knew how to technically elevate you to panelist, Michelle, I would do that. But anyways, Michelle is a real good resource in the AIM Academy community. She's very involved with another organization called Bright and Quirky Kids. So this is really in her wheelhouse. The difficult child or the different child, the exceptional child. Michelle, please, if I'm not explaining your expertise well or how you would identify it, but let people know. I just think that you want to have strategies, and you probably want to first thing in the morning kind of calm yourself and think through, okay, how do I want to go through today and set the tone no matter what, so that at least you can try to manage your own behavior. And you can control yourself, and you just have to have faith in the future for the difficult kid, because we've walked through some really scary seasons with our own children, Vicki and I, and with children of friends. And you know what, Vic, if you think about it, almost all of them really came out the other side.
Yeah.
And were really surprising, and even turned out to be leaders, right? Like the strong-willed child, the really assertive child who gave us the most pushback. A lot of times it was just a very immature gift of leadership.
Yes.
That was having kind of an ugly transition into adulthood, but they turned out to be beautiful adults.
Yes, they're wonderful adults at this point. Yeah.
All right, we have time for one more question before we wrap up here? Anything else anybody wants to comment on or weigh in on? I appreciate the interest in this. So I think we had a poll. Okay, let me end the poll. And Vicki, can you
Yep.
note these? I'm never good at, okay, here's, most people have one teenager, okay, so 1 or 2 kids in the home. Everybody, 26% of the people thought homeschooling is going great. It's going okay. Yeah. 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 I mean, it's really been kind of a tough season to homeschool in. And we do have a poll for you when you exit about other things that you might want to have us do webinars on or have conversations around or discussions around. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Be happy to take your comments and questions in follow-up emails here at AIM Academy. As I said, we want to be partners in your homeschool success story. We want to come alongside of you and provide a resource for you in ways that are meaningful and very helpful. Thank you. Thanks for all the nice comments. Appreciate that, folks. And Vicki, thanks for jumping in here at the last minute to help out.
Anytime.
So I will be sending